Richard, welcome to the House of Shadows and Ink here on YouTube.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No, it's definitely our pleasure. So in like a paragraph or two, tell us who you are and just how awesome your career has been, because you have some amazing job titles, if I can say that way.
Well, thank you. Yes, I did hold for 23 years the title of Central Clancy Writer for Ubisoft, and I was endlessly disappointed they did not have smaller orbiting Clancy writers around me, but that's physics for you. But yeah, I've spent 26 years in the video game industry as a writer, designer, narrative designer, now narrative director. I've worked on games and franchises including The Division, Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, Splinter Cell, Ghost Recon, many others. I
Mm,
also have a book out that just came out last week, actually, called The Video Game Writer's Guide to Surviving an Industry That Hates You. I've
nice.
also published 8 novels and 2 short story collections with another one of each on the way. And I've just finished my first graphic novel script in collaboration with the French author Mats, which will be published next year. It's a horror piece called Bridgewater. And before any of that, I was partially to blame for everyone you've seen hanging out in a coffee house dressed up like a vampire, pretending they're invisible, because I spent 4 years in-house and years on either side freelancing for White Wolf Game Studios, largely working on the World of Darkness.
Nice. Well, huge fan. Thanks for being here. I'm sure there's a lot of topics we can cover about like the difference between writing like for yourself, novels, short fiction, and like with a bunch of other games in or game writers in set IP and universe. But here on the House of Shadows Inc., we like to chat about, like imagination and like just influences and how creativity, basically is born and like just keeps building and just becomes, I don't know, like a world of its own. So tell us about like where did it start for you? When did you realize, doesn't matter the format, that you were interested in storytelling?
Okay, well, that I can actually pinpoint for you exactly. When I was in third grade, I contracted a case of chickenpox, like you do in third grade. And at that point, I was a very serious child, and I would only read nonfiction books about dinosaurs and saber-toothed tigers and catastrophic weather events and things like that. And my mother decided it was time I got my hands on some fiction. So while I was asleep that first night with chickenpox, she snuck into my room, took all my dinosaur books out, and replaced it with the Chronicles of Narnia. And being incredibly bored and having nothing else to read, I read the Chronicles of Narnia, and I was hooked. And then the next day, she took those out and put in Ray Bradbury's The Halloween Tree. And that
Nice.
book changed my life and really has sort of guided my steps ever since. And then the day after that, it was The Chronicles of Prydain by Lloyd Alexander. And the day after that was The Hobbit. And I have been
Yeah.
careening down this path of horror and fantasy and goodness knows what else ever since.
I'm wondering, did your mother like choose those books, or was she speaking like to a well-informed librarian, maybe like
Oh, she
on
chose them.
exactly what to choose?
Mom was an English teacher.
Good.
So she
Oh.
was well aware of this stuff, and she was a big fan of creativity. And my father was a huge science fiction fan as well. And when I got old
Mm.
enough, I realized my dad had a giant science fiction library in the basement. So that was my teenage years right there. But mom very specifically picked those books. And furthermore, she was incredibly supportive of my role playing game habit once I acquired that. And she would pick up any role playing game supplement she saw anywhere. Didn't know anything about systems, didn't know if they fit together. She would just buy them and bring them
Mm.
home. And I ended up with this incredibly eclectic shelf of RuneQuest and the James Bond game and Dungeons and Dragons and Call of
Cool.
Cthulhu. And it was a wonderful education, even if it was kind of hard to get games together sometimes.
Yes, so you did start out with like board games, tabletop games. Um,
Yeah,
so how
I
did you
actually
get
started making
into?
my own games when I was probably about 11, I think.
Mm.
And loved playing those games, loved the Avalon Hill bookcase games, and Dungeons and Dragons. I had my coterie of friends, and we were very tight through high school and college. And though we generally stay away from D&D, we were hipsters, I guess, contrarians. So we would play Call of Cthulhu and Hawk Moon and Stormbringer and Villains and Vigilantes and
So,
anything but the main brand because
oh
we had
yes. And so after school, how did you get like, or when did you decide like, man, this is something I want to do, like work on games in a more professional manner?
Honestly, that didn't come until much later. I grew up actually wanting to be a scientist, and my after school job, all the way through the end of middle school and high school, was I was actually volunteering at various research labs around the Philadelphia area, working on actual scientific research. And I went off to college thinking, hey, I'm going to maybe be a geologist or something like that. And then I realized I just could not handle the math. And
Oh,
that punted me over to an English major. And so I sort of recalibrated to, okay, maybe I'll be an English professor specializing in the weird stuff. And I got through my master's at Boston College, and all the way through, I was running tabletop games and playing games. And I helped found a LARP group in college that ran for, I think, 20 years. We'd have these
cool.
lovely games with 150 people or so rambling around the woods of upstate Connecticut, beating the heck out of each other with plumbing supplies. Those were amazing, and I love them still. And I went to
Sorry, I
grad
think
school and I sort of flamed.
there's
I
a
finished up
connection
after my
issue.
master's and realized, okay, I sort of need to figure out what to do with my life now. And I went to work at a an office job. But while I was doing that, Jennifer Hartshorn, who I had known at Wesleyan, had gone down to White Wolf, and she said, "Hey, I need some writers. I know you love running games. Would you be willing to try writing some material for Wraith the Oblivion?" And that was incredibly generous and kind of her. And so I gave it a shot and wrote 2 chapters for the book Haunts. And I decided, hey, this is fun. I like this. I'm kind of good at this. And Jen kept hiring me, and then Ian Lemkin hired me to do some work on the original Changeling the Dreaming. And then it was a short ride to moving down to Atlanta to take over Wraith when Jen moved over to Vampire.
Nice. I always tell authors it's amazing what you can do with just being a nice person, connecting with others, making friends in like the industry. Who, I
Mhm.
mean, just the doors that can open for you, and well, hopefully you can open for others as well. And in this industry, it really is who you know. But I mean, it's not that easy. You have to like actually actively go out and like meet people and like, what's that fancy word, network, and just
Yeah.
be there. So
The trick
that's good.
is,
That's good.
thank you, yeah. The trick is if you're an editor, though, you don't hire your friends who are writers. You hire writers who are your friends because you can get in
Nice.
a lot of trouble if you hire someone that you like but can't necessarily do the job. It
Mm.
is really just better for everybody if you hire someone who can do the job who you also like.
No, that's true. And so you got into this business that we started building up a like a CV. Did you then start applying, or was it just like more doors opening up?
It was a hand reaching down from the heavens to pluck me into video games, really. I
Cool.
had done 4 years at White Wolf. I'd worked on a ton of books, and I was sort of getting to a point where I felt I had largely said everything I needed to say in that space at that time. Wraith had been canceled. I was working on other lines that weren't as near and dear to my heart. And my friend Dave Weinstein, who worked at Red Storm Entertainment, a video game company here in North Carolina, poked me and said, "Hey, you need a better challenge. We need someone who can do what you can do. Apply."
Mm.
And he prodded me relentlessly until I finally sent in an application, largely to get myself some peace and quiet because Dave is a relentless kind of dude. And much to my surprise, they flew me up for an interview and hired me. And
Nice.
I came home and I got a phone call on Friday from their HR rep who said, "Don't go anywhere. We're going to make you an offer on Monday." And then Monday rolled around. I got the offer. And I called my manager at White Wolf, Ken Cliff, and said, "Hey, Ken, I got an offer from a video game company, and I like working with you. I like working here. I wanted to give you a chance to match it." And he
Mm.
paused for a second, and said, "No, go now, take it." And that was, my road up to North Carolina. Red Storm. I worked on an Anne McCaffrey adaptation. The less we say about that particular game, the better. And then I sort of slid into Tom Clancy land, and I was the Central Clancy writer, as I said, for basically 23 years.
Wow. And how is it being? I know you have like a head writer and the main editor, but like tell us like the normal day of like how many people are there? How do you like? Because I can imagine every writer has like a bunch of ideas, but you need to throw it in there and what sticks and how does it work if you have an awesome idea and no one else thinks it's cool enough?
Then you take that idea and you put it aside. The thing is, working as a video game writer, you are one very small cog in a
Mm,
giant machine that is very complicated, has a lot of dependencies, and is lubricated by ridiculous amounts of money. And so you need to operate smoothly in conjunction with everybody else to make sure this giant machine keeps rolling forward to actually produce a game. As I've said in a couple of other interviews, if I wanted to change a line of dialogue late in the game, it's not that I change a line of dialogue the way I could in a novel. It's
mm,
okay, I write it and then it goes to the approval process, and then we have to hire a recording studio and an actor and a voice director and an engineer to record it. And that file has to go to the team's audio engineers who have to process it. Then it goes to,
sure.
say, level scripting who have to place it in the game. And then it also has to go through QA for testing. And then it has to go to localization to make sure it gets translated into however many languages. And it may, depending, have to go through legal. So I think I
Mm,
worked it out. There's like 18 people would get touched if I changed a single line of
wow.
dialogue at the back end of a game. So it's really a measure six times, cut once kind of job. You want to iterate as much as you can on the front end so that when you actually execute, it goes as smoothly as possible. But you don't just come up with a wild idea. You are part of the whole team pushing forward for this grand conception of a game. And your stuff as a writer needs to sync with the artists and the level builders and
Mm,
the puzzle, the mission designers and the AI engineers who are programming the automatic responses that NPCs in the game will give. And all of that has to work together. And so it's sort of an iterative work process. If you're in the beginning, you start with pitching story ideas based on the foundations of the game. Okay, we know it's a Tom Clancy game, so it's going to be military and modern and shootery and clear and present danger. So that builds the walls of the sandbox you can tell the story in. And you pitch some stories, and the powers that be pick the ones they like and the ones they don't like, and you refine and refine and refine until you come up with something. And then you take the next step down. Okay, we need 15 missions. Here's a bunch of
true.
ideas. Here's stuff that level design is coming up with. Let's all work together and pull story ideas and things like that out of that. And then you get more granular where you're writing the dialogue for the actual missions. First, the core playthrough, what's called the golden path, and then you fill in the background, the overheard conversations, things like
Mm,
that. And it's this endless cycle of smaller and smaller loops, but it is a ton of work and it's constantly connected to other people. You can't just go off and run and hide and write.
mm,
And it is immense in ways that people don't really understand. And that people think of video game writing and they think of, oh, the big flashy cutscenes with all the explosions. That is really the smallest part of what you do. A lot of game writing, sometimes the bulk of it really, is what's called barks, which are just the systemic lines that play when something happens in the game that the player needs to know about. So it's the
mm.
arg he shot me's and look out grenades, and you need to do endless varietals of that. The last game I worked on for Ubisoft, we had 135,000 of them.
Sure.
So that's lines, not words.
Mm,
And that's before we got to the actual mission scripts. So there's a ton of work. And there's a ton of work that happens behind the scenes the player never sees when you're doing character write-ups for concept art, when you're doing
mm,
scripting sides, things that will be recorded to do auditions but will never be part of the game, all that stuff. And it's an incredibly complicated and effort-intensive job,
mm.
and you're constantly juggling chainsaws. But at the same time, when it comes together and you see it in the game, when your work melds with audio and the modelers and the animators and the art, and it's the best feeling in the world.
Sorry, apparently there's a bad internet connection. Could you still see, well, see movement on my side?
Now I can,
Because,
yeah, you froze for a moment
okay,
there.
okay. So you said when you see it finally all coming together, we can just go on from there.
Yeah, and when it's a game, when it's in people's hands, when they're having fun with it. I mean, my job is to help people have fun. That's great. I
Mm.
love that. And when I hear someone quote a line of dialogue I wrote, like the I name is Fisher, I used to work here from Splinter Cell Conviction, that gives me such a moment of joy.
I can imagine. So the writing that you did for games, how similar is it to, let's say, when you started writing short fiction? Anything that you learned and you were able to take over to that medium?
It is a completely different set of writing muscles, honestly. The key difference is interactivity. When I am
Mm.
writing fiction, in theory at least, I am in control of everything. I control the pacing, I control the timing, I control who says what, who does what. Everything is in my hands. When I am writing for a video game, none of it is in my hands because the hero of every video game is not the main character, it is the player. Everyone who has ever played a video game and told somebody about it starts that story with the word I.
Mhm.
It's not Master Chief did it, it's not Link did it, it's not the character did it, I did it. And so you have to wrap your head around that as a video game writer in a way that is really hard for some folks to do, honestly. And you write to the possibility of what the player might do so that anything they
Mm.
do feels good and right. I call it the player shaped hole at the center of the game
Okay.
narrative. And I even argue that we don't actually write stories, we write narrative. We write all the pieces, the props and the setting and the stage dressing and the costumes and the lighting, whatever else, to await the player's presence. And then when the player comes on the stage and interacts with all the conversations we've written, then it becomes their story.
Mm.
And their story is unique because nobody else is going to play it the way they did exactly, even on the tightest, most controlled game experience. And it is our job in part to make sure that no matter what choices they make along the way, it feels good and right and proper and like the story they're telling is a good one.
No, that's for sure. So would you say in, let's say, working on a game that's an existing IP versus like a new one, do you have much more freedom? Because it doesn't sound like there's a lot of freedom anyway.
It depends. It can be actually really freeing to work on an existing IP because the walls of the sandbox have been built. You
Oh,
know
okay.
exactly the tools you
Mm.
have to work with. You don't have to spend time coming up with new stuff and running it through approvals and making sure that the art department's cool with it. And
Mm.
yeah, you can just say you can just get right to work and go, okay, this is a Splinter Cell game. I know it's about Sam Fisher doing super sneaky spy stuff, and roll from there. As opposed to building a world from the ground up, which is exhilarating and fun, but at the same time, you will have to do everything. And
Mm.
so, existing IP, you sort of get to the rubber hitting the road a little faster. And if it's a
True.
good IP, hopefully it is, if they're making more games in it, then there's a lot of stories to tell in that space, and there's still good stuff to choose from and things to play with. If you're building a new IP, then the sky can be the limit, and you throw all the pasta at the wall to see what sticks. You just can't be married to any particular piece of pasta. Sometimes it won't work for technical reasons. Sometimes it won't
Mm.
work because it's too close to something somebody else did. Sometimes it's really cool, but it doesn't show off the features of the game in a way that works. So
Mm.
you put your creativity out there, you see what works, you see what doesn't, and then you merge with everybody else building the game to make sure all your efforts are in harmony, building towards that player experience.
Okay. So, and the different departments, like, do they come together now and then and just like discuss what will and what definitely won't work?
There are so many meetings, all the meetings. When you're doing it right, there is constant communication, both
Mm.
formal and informal. You will
Good.
do reviews of, okay, here's this thing proposed. Is everybody signed off? Can we do it? Yes, good, let's go forward. But you also want to have informal channels of communication. You want to
Mm.
be able to stop somebody from the character building team and say, hey, I had a really cool idea about this character we're working on. I'd like to put this in his backstory. You think we could reflect that in the visuals? You have one of my favorite stories from the game Tom Clancy's The Division, which is set in Manhattan after a genetically engineered virus gets loose. And the main story of the game has missions and dialogue and things like that. But there was also a portion of the game that Red Storm Entertainment, where I was working, had there was a an extraction shooter space where you basically go in, get the stuff, get out, and there was no dialogue and no storytelling there and things like that, no traditional storytelling.
Hmm.
And we had all the writers on the division at Red Storm for a work week, which was great, wonderful team of writers. And the guys who were working on the Dark Zone came down to say, hey, we know we can't do dialogue, we can't do cutscenes, but we want to do storytelling. Can you come up with vignettes, with visual storytelling, with
Can't
tableaus
hear you.
that tell stories of what happened here? Just give us ideas that we can illustrate. And all of
Hmm.
us thought it was great, and we had a ton of fun, and we stopped what we were doing and started brainstorming and shared our lists and compiled and came up with a list of, I think, 20, passed that back down the hall, and it was great and it was awesome. And they put a bunch of those in the game. They looked fantastic, really added depth and meaning to the world. And the only thing that kind of scares me a little bit about that was that, the division takes place dead of winter, and every single person's list of ideas started with the words "dead Santas." So, great minds, I guess. But again, it was a wonderful collaboration. Just multiple departments come together, and we made something great.
No, I agree. So I'm sure you've had this conversation a lot with AI and all this stuff coming in. Like, what protection do you guys have? What aspects do you actually use? Like, do you think, like, when you said you have to write like thousands of those little small pieces of dialogue, is that something that would be like shifted off in the direction of AI, but not replace you guys? What do you think's happening there?
There is movement in some places to replace writers with AI, which I think is a mistake on
Hmm.
numerous levels, leaving aside the massive ethical questions about generative AI. The quality, in my opinion, is not there. There is so much work that has to be done to clean up after it that you might as well have had a writer in the first place.
Hmm.
And to be blunt, AI is simply going to a drive-through and ordering something and getting a bag full of stuff. You don't know what's in that bag. It
Hmm.
might be what you ordered. It might not be. It's probably not good for you regardless. But there is no process of discovery. There is no learning as you do this. Oh, hey, this would
True.
be better. Hey, I've been writing these and they don't quite work, but maybe if we took in this direction. There's no chance to improve it. It is simply checking a box. And that is not the way to quality. That is not the way to the best experience. And yes, I know
Hmm.
there are people who want to just minimize costs, but honestly, if you're going to cut costs on $100 million video game, your writers are probably not really going to get the biggest savings anyway.
Hmm. Well,
It's
if you think of like, I can certainly say when creative minds come together, it's like if they raise each other to an even higher level. If so, just like that group of people coming together every day, working together, it takes the game to a new level. If you have AI there, that's not going to happen. And the few writers that you do have are probably going to be like in a negative space. Their friends have lost their jobs. They have to fight for their own jobs. Like, are they really going to feel open to just, like create and be as creative as possible? So I think those people who are going to try it are probably just going to move back to the way that it was. I spoke to an actor the other day, and his producers said, like, although they do have the contracts and stuff now in place, but he said they would never do it because where's the experience? Where is hanging with other directors and producers and actors and making the connections, and which opens up
Mhm.
a door to a new movie? Like, all of that stuff would just stop.
Yeah. No,
So I hope
I am with
everyone
you.
realizes that. Yes, and there's a place for AI in editing or whatever. I know in Fortnite they had Darth Vader recently speak AI voice. That was funny, but it's a I don't even want to say tool. It's like a gimmick almost. It was nice. It was funny. Move on. So
And let's
we'll
not
see.
murder six polar bears and a walrus every time we type in a query.
Hmm. Okay, so um, when did you then decide to move on really to like short fiction novels? Did you move away from the game writing, or is this just something you do in your spare time?
It is something I do alongside the game writing.
Mm.
I don't view it as spare time. I view it as a separate path. And it's very different muscles that I'm exercising when I'm
Mm.
writing fiction because I control everything. I have the sort of overview and direction on everything. And I'm writing different type of stuff. When I'm writing a video game, I don't need to write description. That's what the artists are there for. They're making the world. I don't need to write interior monologues because everything's being said to the player. And so it's a really different type of writing, different muscles, and I find I can move pretty easily from one to the other as sort of a refresher, as a break from one to the other.
Mm.
But I started while I was still at White Wolf, and it was during the production of the Dark Tyrants anthology for Vampire the Dark Ages. And we were having a departmental meeting. Rob Hatch, who was the editor of the anthology because he was in charge of the vampire line at the time, was talking about how we needed more stories for it. And I stuck my hand up and I said, hey, I wrote the intro fiction for the game book. You want me to give it a shot? He said, why not? And so I turned in a story, and that ended up being the intro story for the anthology. And I'm like, hey, this is fun. So I wrote some more vampire stuff. I wrote the La Sombra clan novel, for example, and then I branched out and started writing my own stuff. I think my first piece of original fiction that got published was a story called Professor Featherington's Lament in an obscure anthology that featured an exploding zeppelin and zombie cannibal ocelots. And that one will never be reprinted in any of my collections going forward. But to quote Monty Python, I got better.
Mm. Oh, that's good. As long as you're having fun and you're like exercising those creative muscles. And would you say like any one specific writing um, helped you in another way? Let's say like even being more in the character's mind, moving over to games, or is it like you said, just completely different but still good exercise?
There are places where techniques from one have gone to help the other. One of the
Mm.
things I learned to do in video games is a process I invited called the 10 words rule, which was I was having tremendous difficulty getting inside the head of a character in the game Splinter Cell Double Agent. I just couldn't figure who this guy was and where he came from. He didn't make any sense to me. So I sat down and said, okay, let's stop writing dialogue. Let's figure out who he is first. So I wrote down a list of 10 words that this guy would always say. And I wrote
Mm.
down 10 words he would never say. And in that chunk of writing, in his word choice, I got to know him. I figured out where he was from. I figured out his socioeconomic class, his education, his attitude towards profanity, his sentence structure, all that I figured
Mm.
out from talking to him in that way. And then I followed up and did a couple fake interviews with him, basically, where I'd write a question, then just ramble in his character voice so I could refine it.
Cool.
And that technique is something that I can really use in fiction. And so that's something that I have promulgated throughout the years in video game writing, but also I've carried it over to my fiction side. But it really is a very, very different style of writing. And the the folks who think they can jump from one to the other seamlessly are either far more talented than I am, or they are in for a surprise.
Mm.
And this is not to
Can't
say
be
that
easy.
a novelist who doesn't immediately get video games is a bad writer. It just means
Mm.
it's a different form with different needs and rules and regulations and strictures and demands, and they don't get it yet. Maybe they will get it at some point, maybe they won't. I've got friends from other media who've jumped in and done great work. I've known people from other media who've jumped in and completely face planted. And it goes back the other way as well. I've known video game writers who've tried to write fiction and they write it like a video game, and
Mm.
that doesn't read so good. So
What advice would you give to a fiction author who wants to get into video game writing?
a couple of things. One, play a lot of games and think about the narrative and the writing, why those words are chosen. When you're writing a novel, words are free, words are infinite. When
Mm.
you're writing a video game, words take up, well, they used to take up disk footprint. Now everything's more digital, but everything has to be recorded. Everything costs this. Everything has to be there for a reason. And more importantly, if you are writing something in dialogue, it is there to support the game experience, not take it over. You don't want to step on the gameplay. You don't want to keep the player from doing what they bought the game to do. So getting that understanding to begin with. Then make some games if you can, or at the very least, go to video game conferences, read video game writing books, talk to the people actually doing the job, get a sense of how it works day to day. I will be shameless and plug my own book there as something that might be useful in that regard. But get a sense of what the job actually is as opposed to the way it gets romanticized on TV and movies and things like that. Mythic Quest is actually a better look at that than anything else I've ever seen. And then, if you can, start writing the stuff. If you don't want to work in a tool set, at least write down the page. Write 20 variants on Arg, he shot me. Write a character description that is not just a character description, but one that a concept artist could pick up and use to build somebody, that an animator could use to build an animation set for, that a voice director could use to cast, things like that. Write a script for a cutscene that is a video game cutscene, not a movie scene. Write game dialogue that communicates stuff a player wants to hear, and then look at it, read it out loud, see where it's bad, write it again. And for the last step, ultimately, if you get a chance, get your hands on a tool set, whether it's Twine or Unreal, whatever, and start trying to put your stuff in a game to see how it plays as well as how it looks on the page, because that's very different. The best, wittiest line in the world can look great on the page, but you put it in a game and it steps on the fact that 23 space zombies are attacking all of a sudden. The player's not going to want to listen to your clever dialogue. The player's going to want to go fight space zombies. And so you just need to get the experience and the feel of that. And honestly, it's okay if the first one you do is terrible. Everybody's first one is terrible.
Oh, yes.
Everybody's first 10 are terrible, really.
Same with fiction.
And, yeah, you iterate, you get better. That's all there is to it. And you keep doing that. And if you go find a local game jam, go introduce yourself to folks and say, hey, do you need writing? Do you need words? Do you need someone to write your UI text? And they'll say no, but they'll be wrong and they'll need you. And that's a way to see how it actually works. And that's a way to get games in a portfolio that you actually worked on. But it is rare for anyone who is not at the super tippy top to just sort of get airdropped into a team and be told, great, you're the writer now. And
True.
you do yourself and you do the game a much better service if you learn how the craft actually works and you get your hands dirty instead of jumping in, shouting Leroy Jenkins, and thinking that the rest of the team is there to manifest your.
Very true. So I have to add if I have to think back to my favorite dialogue from a game, it was definitely Monkey Island. Like
Oh, I
that
love
that
Monkey
was
Island.
like the best dialogue ever. Like if I can meet those people, like congrats, hats off. That was some of the funniest dialogue ever. Okay, so let's see. Yes, your book. Tell us more about your book and especially why that specific title. And then I'll definitely put the link in the description as well, so folks can check it out.
Well, thank you. Yeah. So I was flying out to Game Developers Conference in 2024, and I'd been sort of kicking around the idea of writing a book for a while, but nothing had really crystallized. And while I was on the flight, the phrase popped into my head: "The Kitchen Confidential of video game writing." Aha, there's something there. And I thought about it, and I realized there have been a ton of books on how to write for games, on how to do the technique, on how to write good dialogue, how to use tools, all of that stuff. And they're great books, and I recommend a whole bunch of them very highly. But I had not really seen stuff on how to do the job, how to survive day to day. And I've seen some great writers run into trouble because they really just didn't understand the methodology of being a game writer. And that resulted in just pain for everybody. So I said, I've been doing this 25 years. I've seen some stuff. I worked on big games, small games, successful games, less successful games, IPs, new stuff, you name it. I have a lot of experience to share, and I want to tell people how to do the job, what they need to survive so they can do their best work. And at the same time, I wanted to create something that was a little bit of a manifesto. So it was a basis of knowledge, something that everybody could share and build upon, because game writing knowledge is fragmented from studio to studio and team to team. I wanted there to be sort of a common conversational base of, here's a good way to do something. Here's a good approach that works regardless of the type of game you're on. A professional guideline that people could then pick up and run with and build their own stuff
Cool.
with. At the same time, I have seen a whole lot of badness. I've seen bad decisions. I've seen mistakes made over and over and over again. I've seen the same mistakes 20 years into my career that I was seeing in 2003. We can do better. We should do better. And I think the industry is structured in a way that it is set up to not let writers do their best work. It is set up in a way that it does not reward doing good process and things like that. And that needs to change. And it needs to change for the benefit of the writers, so they're less miserable and they can do better work. It needs to change for the sake of the games. So they're better games, they get better writing, they're more enjoyable. More people want to play them. And it needs to change for the sake of, frankly, the business. Because you do this stuff better, you're not wasting money, you're not wasting time. You are making a better product in a more efficient way, so everybody wins. But I chose the word hate very specifically after thinking about it, because there has just been so much relentless negative behavior that I've seen over the years towards game writing and games writers. And
Sure.
I was not going to soft pedal it. Let me put that out there. Let me get the attention. Let me start the debate. I mean, the joke was one of the working titles of the book was McDonald's French fries because it was so salty. But really, it is less salty than you'd think. It is a guide to trying to do better. And yeah, I call out a lot of bad behavior and a lot of mistakes and a lot of things that have gone wrong, but always in the interest of, here's how we can do it better. Here's a way to survive this. Here's a way to make sure it never happens again. And I hate to say it, the book even ends on a kind of hopeful note. Don't tell anybody, it'll ruin my credit as a horror writer. But it's a wake-up call to get attention, but it's not just a call. It is a call and then let's go forward. Let's do more. Let's do better. Let's make everybody more productive and happy and satisfied.
And that's what you want in a creative team anyway. So talking about like bad experiences, I know recently there was a pirate game that was complete chaos with different studios all around the world. And it was just like people got fired, people quit, people were accused of stuff. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it's the same people who made Assassin's Creed, and they made a new pirate game, and it was just
Skull and Bones.
Skull and
Yes.
Bones.
That was
That
Ubisoft.
is a
That's
bad
I worked for 3 years.
Were you involved there anywhere, or you were already
No,
moved
no,
on?
no.
Because I know
I was busy elsewhere.
that was a
But
big issue.
I watch stuff like that, and it just breaks my heart for the people working on it. Because it's very rare that there's a game that takes 8 to 10 years. Yes, Baldur's Gate 3 did, and they did an amazing job, and I have nothing but love and praise for that team. But a lot of times the game takes that long, it's because it's actually 3 games, and they get this far into it, and then they scrap it, and they start another one, they get this far into it, and they scrap it. And that is just incredibly demoralizing and painful for the devs involved, and it doesn't lead to best work, and you're always looking over your shoulder. And very few of those stories end well.
I
And
can
it's
imagine.
there's so many decisions, from the gameplay model to the sort of maps to where you're going to put your money. There's just a million different decisions that go into something like that potentially going off the rails. And a lot of times there are people on board who can see it going off the rails, but they don't have access to the brakes.
Yeah, it's probably a lot of like one guy in charge, and they're not listening to like the authors below them, kind of. So
It's
yes,
it's so
I'd say in your
complicated.
book
So many
it's
people.
covered. Yeah, it is
And
complicated when you get so many
and a
people
game like
working.
that, yeah, you're doing what's called co-developments a lot of times, where you have different studios around the world all collaborating, trying to do it together. So you have communication problems and chain of command issues, and It's just
and
the nightmares.
deadlines.
Yeah.
No, I can imagine. So, if you look now compared to, let's say, like a big game like that now, like so many studios, so many people, I take it everyone's just working like on a salary. Are there any type of games you've worked on where you actually like invested in the end product, like how it does?
I have never made a game that was my own, at least not on the video game side,
Hmm.
but I always put my absolute best into every game I'm working on. I want them all to succeed. I want to do the
Good.
best work possible for the players and the fans. I want to support my fellow devs' works as best I can. And so on that level, I'm always invested in the success. I mean, some of these games, I'll be honest, are near to my heart than others. Maybe because I got more creative input on them. Maybe because I
Hmm.
felt I was in a place to do really good work there in a way that some other games didn't allow me. But every time a game is released, your heart goes up in the air, and if it doesn't do well, it crashes through the floor. And
Hmm.
I've worked on games that have sold untold millions of copies and been thrilled to death by that and the response to them. And I can think of one game in particular that the company literally did not tell anybody the game was in production or that it was getting released, and they did a stealth release of it during a big video game trade show. So it immediately got buried in the news there.
Hmm.
So nobody bought it, and it just
Sure.
disappeared. And that was a little bit of a heartbreak.
Yeah, that's bad. Let's see. So now I'm forgetting what I wanted to ask. Um, there was I actually had something cool now. Because I was shocked now with the just like a stealth release kind of thing. That's
Mm-hmm.
scary. Um, yeah, so when it comes to the success of a game, is it like, with the movies, the box office, like opening weekend, how long before you decide success, profitable? What's your measure?
The way things work these days, they're calibrating long before the game's released with how many wish lists the game shows up on,
Oh,
people who
okay.
are intending to buy it. So they've got a
Hmm.
pretty good sense of where it's going to hit. Generally, you do, your biggest sales right off the bat and then it tapers off. So ideally, you want to hit big out of the gate. But there are games that have hung around and picked up steam in later years
Hmm.
as well. And the trick is to, if you have a community that is devoted to the game, to keep giving them content to stick around. They can turn around and say, hey, you got to play this great game. And so the measure of success or failure is tricky, but ultimately it comes down to, are people playing the game? And if they're playing the game, well, then are they buying the new skins, the new characters, the new weapons, and things like that come along?
Hmm.
And that can be, some games operate on that model, what's called games as a service. Some games are complete discrete packages, and it's just one and done. But you want the real measure of the success is how many players have their hands on it.
True. And that's now across like Steam and PlayStation, Xbox, whatever. Is there a specific preference to like what platforms to be on? Like, what's the benefit of being only PlayStation or only Steam? Like, I've always wondered as a gamer myself, why not just release everywhere?
It's a complicated business kind of deal. And sometimes if you are exclusive to one platform, that's because the owner of that platform is paying you to develop for their platform.
Oh, okay.
And maybe it'll be an exclusive for their platform. Or maybe it'll be you're on ours first, and then 6 months later you can go to
Mm,
the other ones. But there's a reason that you do that, and it's generally based on getting the money to actually get the game made.
okay. But so, like, actually beforehand, already get paid some of the money.
Well, you get paid the money for development.
Mm,
The company invests in you doing that, and you have what are called stage gates, which is here's where we are at 6 months. We were supposed to deliver these 10 things. Here they are. Do we pass? Yes. Good. Give us another check. That lets us keep the lights on to the
okay.
next one. And so that's a model that can work pretty well to make sure everything is going on track and you're not veering off into the swamps instead of producing a
Mm,
game. And there's ups and downs, and there's goods and bads, and there's some publishers that are supposed to be not so great to work with, and some publishers are supposed to be great to work with.
Okay.
But the idea is that you get the money to make the game, so you don't have to raise it all beforehand yourself, which is really hard to do
Mm.
unless you have a game to sell, which you can't make unless you have the money. And yeah, the business side is ridiculous. But the benefit to being exclusive on a platform, either short term or long term, is you get that money in many cases to help you create the game.
Mm. Good. So, talking about business, and like the authors involved, how close are you to the people who make the decisions, for instance, like a media tie-in, like to make a novelization of a game?
That depends, and it depends on the company, the size. So, big company like Ubisoft, they have whole departments for stuff like
Mm.
that. And smaller studio, they might say, "Hey, you're not doing anything right now. Could you maybe write a pitch for a novel and send it out?" And
Mm.
it all depends. I was lucky enough to get to do a Ghost Recon novel while I was working at
Nice.
Ubisoft, and that was a mind-blowing experience. And I can't tell some of the stories that go along with that, but I will tell one, which was I'd written the book and they sent the cover image over, and I said, "Hey, there's a helicopter on the cover." They said, "Yep." And I said, "There's no helicopter in the book." And there was a pause, and they said, "Could you add one?" Okay, let me write another chapter that we can slip in, and you'll have it tomorrow.
Mm.
And so I wrote the chapter with the helicopter, and it got inserted into the book and edited, whatever. And then the book comes out, and lo and behold, they'd reverted to the previous art with no helicopter.
Mm.
So, but it was a good
Yeah.
chapter, so I'm glad it's there.
From a publisher's perspective, I can just imagine what happened in the offices over there. Like,
Mhm.
okay, no, that's good to know. Like, and because I'm always thinking authors like look at other industries, other mediums, see where you can like where your interests are, your strengths are.
Mhm.
Maybe write novelizations. We've got authors who are massive movie fans who are trying to get into like media tie-ins there. I know quite a few guys, Tim Wagner, Jonathan Maybe. These guys do amazingly well. Alan Dean Foster with like I
Mhm.
think it's like is it Dune or Star Trek? I'm not even sure, but those guys do amazing work, and I'm sure there are some like well-known guys who are also in like the gaming industry writing those media tie-ins. Um, but it's good for authors to know about these opportunities and like actually announce this is what I want to do. I'm interested in this, so that like when your friend invited you to come and like write for them, like if you didn't show any interest in gaming or that you're interested in this kind of stuff to write it how it works, people
Mhm.
will never know. So I think authors need to put it out there and announce
Yeah.
it. Like, so talking about like announcing anything like a dream project that you would like to work on.
Oh goodness. There were two dream projects I had when I worked at Ubisoft. One was doing this massive, actually, American Civil War um, game that would include voice command as well as console command or
Mm.
controller command. And I figured out a way to get around many of the problems with the settings, such as one-shot weapons and things like that. And that was a dream project that I knew was never going to go anywhere. So, but I tried it anyway, and of course it vanished into the void. But the other one that I pitched that I really had high hopes for that just never quite panned out was I spent many years working on the Splinter Cell franchise. And it's about this super spy named Sam Fisher who sneaks into dark places and goes around doing sneaky spy things and leaving a trail of bodies in his wake and saving the world. And I thought it would be very easy to just tweak this a few degrees to the left, and suddenly we've got a horror game. Instead of super spy, you've got a vampire
Mm.
or something else. And that would be really cool and really fun to do. And that was one that I would have loved to do, but that again, that one never got off the ground. But really, at this point, it's a case of any game that I go to work on, I find my joy in that. I find where's
Mm.
my way in, what's interesting and exciting about this, even if it's a franchise that I'm not initially thrilled about. there's always got to be something. You got to find the fun thing in it.
True.
And from there, it can blossom and you can find creativity and ways to do stuff that you've always wanted to. You just have to find a way to match your creativity with the needs of the thing you're working on.
And anything you can tell us that you're working on now that you're not like contracted to keep quiet?
I'm actually between jobs right now. Unfortunately, the layoffs at Microsoft in July affected the studio I was working at, and so the team was unfortunately let go. So I am looking at doing some independent work and taking the time to do some of my personal writing and a few other projects. I've got a card game design that I'm currently talking to someone about.
Nice.
I'd love to do another graphic novel. I'm 50,000 words into my new novel work in progress. And it's a different thing, but I look forward to getting back in the game and doing more video game work as soon as possible. But in the meantime, I am definitely keeping busy and juggling plenty of chainsaws.
Well, we do board games at Crystal Lake, so you can contact me anytime as well if you have an idea or, like you said, a card game. Because with our kids stuff, like the Crystal Lake Kids, the Eddie Poe show, we've got our existing characters and we want to like put them on. Like the kids are watching the show, they're reading the books. We want to give them a game as well, and it's characters that they're familiar with. So yes, I've also got a lot of ideas for board games, and who knows, maybe one day animation and getting into computer games, PlayStation, or whatever. The world where you used to just like do one thing and sit with that career until the day you die, like no career stays the same anymore. Like you have to
No.
keep up to date, you have to keep adapting, you have to keep building your skill set. You can't just sit still and expect everything's going to run smooth. Well,
Yep.
Richard, I'm sure everyone is like super excited. I know a lot of authors will find this very inspiring, informative, those who want to get into this. I hope everyone checks out your book. I think I need to get a copy as well. Any final words to like other creators and creative people out there?
The best thing I can say is that you have always done your best work so far. You have never done your best work yet. So even if you hit a roadblock, go another direction, find another way around it, find another approach, and the progress will come and the better work will come. And yeah, it's a tough marketplace right now, but there is always going to be opportunity. You may not recognize it at first, but be open to it and be willing to learn and embrace what it brings you.
Excellent. I love that. Thank you so much, Richard. For everyone watching, we call our fans the shadow dwellers and fellow creators. Definitely check out Richard's work and let us know in the comments if you have any questions for him, and we'll definitely get those answers to you. Thanks again, Richard.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a delight.